I suppose I should begin at the moment that feels like the hinge of everything. My name is Imran, and I used to think my life would always be ordinary. A steady job surveying rural roads, isolated nights sleeping in a cheap guest room, the sort of job that teaches you to ignore creaking floorboards and to call most strange things weather. But then the hollow road found me on a rain-dark evening when my truck's alternator finally failed and I had no choice but to follow a poorly marked dirt track that the map on my phone refused to recognize. The road led beneath trees that leaned together like a roof, and when the sky closed in the way it did that evening, even the air seemed to stop being a thing you moved through and instead became a presence that moved with you. And at first I told myself I would only walk a short way and wait for dawn, that I would not be foolish, but humans lie to themselves easily. Have you noticed? We tell ourselves we are explorers when we are merely avoiding the immediate discomfort of admitting we are lost. So I walked, my boots heavy with the wet soil, my flashlight cutting thin cones through the mist that hugged the ground, and as the small lane bent and bent again, the world narrowed. There was only the low hiss of rain in the trees, and then, after maybe an hour, the smell changed. Mossy wood and wet dirt are normal in the hills, but under that scent was something older, something like cold iron and deep water, as if the ground remembered someone drowning long ago and kept a ghost of that memory in its pores. The first house I found was empty, a low peasant cottage with its single lamp guttered out and a kettle on the stove crusted with old rust. I tried the front door and it stuck, but with one strong shoulder I entered into a room that smelled of smoke and old bread, and beneath the dust on the table there were two teacups placed opposite each other as if someone had just stepped away. That little domestic detail made a slow thing in my chest relax for a moment. Humanity was clearly present here, until I noticed the notice roughly pinned by a nail to the beam above the hearth. Do not answer. The scrawl was old and the paper yellowed, and someone had underlined the words 3 times. The note felt obscene and instructive at the same time, a begging and a warning wrapped together. I slept on the floor near the stove because my boots were soaked and the rain had not stopped, and at some point in the black middle of the night I woke to a sound like air moving through a throat and to the impression that the house was listening. A distant knock, slow and deliberate, came from somewhere down the lane, and then another voice, softer, younger, said my name as if they had been expecting me specifically and had waited a long time for the pleasure of calling it. And when I opened my mouth I could not tell whether my answer rose because of fear or habit. I walked back toward the lane in the small hours, carrying a coil of rope I thought might be useful and wearing a jacket that had long ago lost its color, and the road at that hour had a sheen like old bone through the mist, and there I saw a figure at the far curve. Not a human walking, but something that made a human silhouette by standing in the way a human stands and then being still as the world moved around it. It was thin and wore what looked like a long coat soaked into the shape of its body, and when it turned its head in the angle of lamplight I saw its face was too smooth, a blank like a plaster mask that had been polished and left to dry in the wind. I moved closer because foolishness has an appetite of its own, and because the figure had called my name again, and this time there was impatience in it, and as I stepped forward the ground gave a small tremor like a breath beneath my own feet, and a whisper rose from the hollow that lay off the road, a place locals called the hollow where the land dipped into a bowl and refused to hold light the way the rest of the world did, and the whisper was not a voice so much as a string of syllables that sounded like names the earth had kept and made soft, and the thing on the road matched it, opening its smooth face in something many might call a smile but which felt like a seam. And then I noticed at its feet several small things, pebbles arranged in circles, little bowls made from bark filled with damp soil, the remains of offerings or games I could not tell, and at the center of that small carefully ordered array lay a scrap of paper with a name on it. Not mine, not anyone I recognized, and someone had written beneath the name, in a different hand, "Return when called," and the air hummed as if the paper itself had been pressed and had exhaled. I should have turned around. Every rational piece of me screamed to leave and find a village with a working room and a man with a proper laugh and a radio for company. But instead I stepped toward the circle and my foot found a thin sound in the earth, like the faint pluck of a harp string when a hand visits it. That pluck was the first promise the hollow made. It promises and then it waits to see who will answer. By daylight the lane seemed ordinary, deceiving in how normal the trees looked and how usual the birds sounded if you chose to believe you heard birds, but the small oddities accumulated like dust. bowls on doorsteps filled with cold water, coughs that came from behind shutters in houses when there was no wind, and names left scratched into lintels in a handwriting ranging from childish to the careful script of clerks who learned to write by copying forms. The people I found were few. An old woman who kept the little shop and whose eyes seemed to always be dry. A quiet man who mended nets on his stoop and spoke in slow sentences as if each word cost him something. And each of them said, in one way or another, the same thing. The hollow learns by listening, it keeps what you speak, it returns what it learns in the night. And the old woman pressed a cloth into my hand the way some women press charms and said, "Do not answer it if called. Do not repeat back what you hear." And her voice trembled around the edges like flint in silk. I tried to make sense of that as a rational bargain. Perhaps a superstition to keep children from playing near a sinkhole. Perhaps an old agricultural rite meant to protect the winter food supply. But on my second night there, the hollow proved it was not superstition but a kind of thinking thing, patient and able to eat the syllables you dropped into the dark. I woke to the sensation of someone speaking close by, and then the floor below my cot groaned like an animal shifting in sleep, and I heard my name called in the precise cadence my mother used to call me from the yard when I was a child, and I realized with a small sickness that the hollow keeps not only names but the music behind them, the way a mother draws vowels when worry is coming, and it uses that music to make you come. I buried myself under a jacket and resolved not to answer even if the voice pressed through wood or wound or time. The small rituals the villagers taught me helped. Speak in numbers rather than names, listen with your eyes closed so your tongue does not dance toward memory, and keep a pebble in your mouth to distract any urge to reply. Meaningless distractions are what they taught each other when hope is the only coin left. But even the best tricks fail when a machine inside your skull remembers the lost and wants you to say them aloud. And one night when the bell in the small chapel tolled an hour late, I heard something not from the hollow but from the river that runs past the lane. A voice that sounded like my brother's dumb, lazy laughter, the exact pattern of sound of his breath. And I almost walked toward it because the human body is made of small foolish pulls toward familiar warmth. The hollow learns and then imitates warmly. And in that imitation it becomes more dangerous because we step without thinking. I did not step that night, not at first, and I told myself I had done well until the man who mended nets left a scrap of his own in front of me the next morning. A small burnt note with the line, "Do not go when you think love fights honor." And he looked at me with the watery permanence of someone who has watched a family member vanish into a place that ate voice. The thing I learned most painfully there is that the hollow does not always want you gone. Sometimes it wants to make a bargain that will keep you alive in exchange for something else, and people decide such bargains in desperation. The old woman who ran the shop had once been a teacher in another life, and she told me one story in fragments. Once, long ago, the hollow would take the names of the dead and keep them like dolls and offer memories in return, a clever trade in a poor valley. You give the grief a place to sleep and the hollow keeps a fragment of the voice, but humans grow greedy. They began to offer names of the living to keep harvests from failing, to stop storms, to keep wolves away, and the hollow learned. That living voice is a precious spice, warm and full of motion, and so the bargains shifted. That is why the lintel had that carved message, "Do not answer." It is why bowls sit on doormats. It is why people sign their names on stone with a trembling hand and then press the stone into the creek to wash it away like the theft stings their palms. And when you have sat with men and women who refuse to let their tongues find the syllables their child once said and watch them in the way a surgeon watches a fragile graft take, you understand how fear can become ritual, and ritual can become industry, and industry a cage. The third night in the lane is the one that reshaped the measure of my days. I had thought that if I understood the system I could keep myself safe. Do not answer, do not repeat, do not look into the well, and above all do not offer a name you love. But the hollow's curiosity of voice is cunning, and it moves like water seeping through fabric until even the seams yield. On that night the mist rose early and thick, and from the trees I could hear a clicking that sounded like someone stepping in. Time, slow and deliberate, and at the edge of my sight shapes gathered like coiled things waiting to stretch. The hollow calls people by the music that once made them human and then waits to see whether they will sing back, and when they do not, it does something stranger. It borrows body. Something emerged from the hollow's edge that night which I swear on the worn pews of every chapel I have ever entered I cannot name as either holy animal or holy corpse. It moved with the geometry of the things that have spines and the wrongness of something knotted out of branches and the skin of machinery, and it came forward with a mouth that did not quite open, but rather separated the outside of the face into a fold like a trunk on an elephant, leaving a suggestion of speech. The villagers scattered and closed shutters, but some did not run, because a mind empty from worry will do whatever custom teaches, and the child priest, a small boy with too many teeth, took his place at the well and sang from a page of paper that had faded with age. He sang the old lullaby no one else used, and the creature paused as if it listened and then turned toward the voice, and where it passed the ground bent in small furrows as if the earth drew a breath. I stood behind a tree and watched, while a woman who had offered the hollow the name of her lost husband years before walked slowly to meet the thing. And when the creature touched her forehead, I saw her blink as though someone had unfrozen her face for a single instant. And then she laid her palm on the creature's side and wrapped a scarf around her wrist like an offering, and said aloud a phrase that made my heart fall out of my chest. "Keep his name, not mine." She walked back to her doorway, and the creature slouched away into the fog, taking nothing in its teeth and leaving behind a pattern of small depressions like toe prints pressed hard and left to dry. And from that night on I understood that the hollow did not only steal. It learned the arithmetic of trade. It would take something precious and it would leave a fragment, and people named it mercy. Some of these trades were small and quietly kind. A cough subsiding, a long swelling creative memory restored to a grandmother for an afternoon, a child's fever eased by an absence in the parent's voice. Others were more monstrous. Children who grew strange in their speech, adults who forgot how to cry and instead laughed at the wrong times because the whole had shaped them into a mimic, and lovers who came home with the wrong rhythm in their kisses. I wanted to leave after watching the woman and the creature, but the road out had changed as these things do. A slight bend moved like a lever, and the way back folded inward so that any direction felt like a decision to step into the hollow's map. Then, in my pocket, my phone buzzed with a message about a job I had not applied for. And the strangest thing is how human life has obligations that straighten your spine like a harness. For all the horror in the lane, I had responsibilities that spoke in a small voice the hollow could not copy. In the end, I chose to remain one more night because some small writerly part of me wanted to test the limit of the beast. It was the fourth night that taught me the final lesson, the one I have tried to pay forward with my story. Bargains have edges, and edges cut. That evening the rain returned, the kind of rain that cleans small things and steals others in the way that the hollow does, and under the wash of it an old man came to my cot and sat and asked if I would keep a promise for the valley. He was the man who mended nets. His hands were split at the knuckles like bread taken too often, and he had a small stone in his palm that he pressed into my hand like a coin, and in his voice was a fatigue that had become knowledge. "They ask for a vow," he said, and he spoke nothing noble. It was a simple sentence with 1,000 years of bargaining lodged in it. "Swear that you will keep their name for one season and you shall go." I thought of the woman who had saved her husband's name and of the child who had returned from the well with eyes full of the hollow's glimmer, and I thought that running away may be only a delay unless one takes the ledger of the hollow with you. So I took the stone and I swore in the little way people did in that place, because I had seen what refusal cost them. Sometimes refusal costs the harvest, sometimes it costs a whole year's sleep, and sometimes it costs a child's voice pulled like thread through a loom. That night the hollow called my name, and I answered only in numbers. Then I pressed the stone to my forehead until the little warmth of palm was a memory, and I slept. In the morning I mounted my truck, and the road opened in a way it had not earlier, as if the hollow's appetite had been sated by the contract of a single man, and because I carried someone else's debt it let me go. But leaving was not a clean thing. The boy who cleaned the nets waved me off with a hand that shook, and the old woman pressed the same cloth I had tied earlier into my pack and said, "Keep it close. Do not sing what you took. Remember that hush is your safe coat." For weeks after the lane I felt like a man who had a missing sentence in his mouth. My voice inevitably slipped and the wrong vowel would arrive, and sometimes a neighbor across the room would look at me as if listening for someone else, and the air between us would narrow. One evening on a radio show I spoke a joke about my childhood, and from behind the laughing sound there came a small note that sounded like a voice the hollow had practiced, and I felt my skin peel back where my name sometimes used to sit comfortably. And later that week when I tried to tell this story I found myself saying the hollow's phrase by accident, a line borrowed like a small coin that had been passed through too many hands, and I knew then that what I had carried away was not only memory but the hollow's new material, a thing that would feed if I let it be fed further. So here is my warning. Cut as flat as a stone. Do not go to lanes that the map forgets. When you hear a voice outside the hour, do not go. Do not repeat what the hollow taught you, not even as a grim joke among friends, because voices travel on their own now in ways we do not yet understand, and a name once given in a bargain is a key someone else can use. If you hear your name in the quiet of a road, don't answer, and if you ever pass a bowl on a doorstep, walk past it as if you are walking the edge of a storm. Do not look in the well, and if a child in a lane smiles at you with a mouth too wide and says simply, "We are glad you came," close your eyes and keep your souls moving, and do not let your voice calm the hollow's hunger. I tell you this in the hope that words carried elsewhere will not be the coin that the hollow uses to buy someone new. If you must know the name of the hollow, do not ask me. Names have the habit of carrying goods from mouth to mouth like passengers on a ferry. But keep this little fact. Silence is the ledger that bankrupts the hollow most easily, and where silence is impossible, carry a pebble in your mouth and a stone in your hand, and remember that some bargains are far older than hunger, and far cleverer than survival.